I think we're ready to start. So I want to thank you all for coming tonight. On behalf of the Iowa Alliance for Responsible Agriculture, welcome. Thank you for coming. My name is Diane Rosenberg. I'm the president of the Iowa Alliance and the executive director of Jefferson County Farmers and Neighbors. And I want to welcome everyone on Zoom. We've got about 75 more people that are watching on Zoom. So we've got a really nice turnout for tonight. I want to also welcome our speakers, Dr. Chris Jones, Audrey Tran Lam, Michelle Kenyon, and soon to be seen on our screen, Mary Jo Forbord. She'll be joining us through Zoom tonight. So the Iowa Alliance for Responsible Agriculture, IRA, Iowa Alliance, I'm going to use those interchangeably, it's all the same thing. We put this meeting together tonight to really take a hard look at something that rural and urban Iowans face, and that's the impact of factory farming on our health. And I'm not just talking about factory farms per se, I'm talking about the entire system of monocropping, industrial monocropping that props up the factory farm system, that produces about 98% of the meat, dairy, and eggs that is purchased in the United States today. Now, if there's anybody that's new here to the whole factory farm issue, those big, long rectangular buildings that you see out and about, in the rural areas, that's what we're talking about. Concentrated animal feeding operations, CAFOs, factory farms, all the same thing. These are buildings that house, up to thousands of hogs, in some places chickens, turkeys, a whole range of livestock, but in Iowa, mostly hogs. These animals are in these confinements their entire lives. And, the system is not only inhumane, but it creates a lot of toxic waste that's not healthy for people or anybody, or the animals or anyone. The Iowa Alliance website has a lot of information on this if you're new to this issue. And you can find us more information on our website at iowaresponsibleagriculture.org. So IRA was formed 10 years ago. We just had our 10th year anniversary. And we came together because we wanted to fight for a more environmentally just system. We're a coalition of nearly 30 community, state, and national organizations, all working to create this environmentally just system. We advocate for a factory farm moratorium. We support responsible, respectful, and regenerative agriculture. Agriculture that doesn't harm people, it doesn't harm the animals, and it doesn't harm the planet. Now, Iowa, admittedly, is a tough state for people who care about responsible, respectful, and regenerative agriculture. Big Ag is really powerful. It has long tentacles into the Iowa State House. It pulls in both Republicans and Democrats. This is a bipartisan problem. This is a bipartisan problem, a program too, a bipartisan problem that should not be, thought one party or another. I mean, we have to look at this as a whole. But 63% of Iowans support a factory farm moratorium. We Iowans are concerned about our water quality. We Iowans are concerned about the alarming rise in cancer rates in the state. And there's a whole lot more of us that oppose this kind of agriculture than those who support it and practice it. And IRA is working to harness that energy, to bring that together, to really work toward eventually transforming our industrial agriculture system into a healthy food production system. Now, it's this concern about Iowa's high cancer rates that prompted the Iowa Alliance to invite our panel of speakers here tonight. In February, the Iowa Cancer Registry issued its 2024 report. It found Iowa has the second highest rate of new cancer cases in the country and the fastest rising incidence of cancer in the nation. And what was being blamed? Binge drinking. Now, that's very curious, given that much of the state is devoted to industrial agriculture It's home to 13,000 factory farms, mostly hogs. We've got about 25 million of them. 70% of Iowa is in crops. Most of that is corn and soybean crops, and those are bathed in pesticides, herbicides, and fungicides. Half of our waterways are polluted, and that only half of those it's only half of the waterways that are even tested every 2 years. So half of what's tested is polluted. We have over 12,000 private wells that have nitrate levels that are dangerous to human health. A third of Iowa's cities and towns are susceptible to nitrate and other pollutant contamination. So I'm just guessing that the culprit might be more than binge drinking. And our speakers here tonight, we have experts in water quality, nitrate consumption on the physical body, agrochemical exposure. They're going to help us understand that there's a lot more to Iowa's high cancer rates than drinking. And we're also going to see that we have alternatives, ways to access healthier, safer foods than what's produced in our industrial system. And access to that will grow that whole system. So we're going to start now. After our speakers complete their presentations, we're going to open it up to your questions. If you're on Zoom, please put your questions in the Q&A box, not the chat, so we can easily see them. And we'll get to as many as we can. So first, we're going to start with how our agricultural pollutants even wind up in Iowa's waterways and why we have some of the dirtiest waters in this nation. So our first speaker is Dr. Chris Jones. He's a retired research engineer from IIHR Hydroscience and Engineering at the University of Iowa. He's the former manager of the Iowa Water Quality Information System, IQUIS, which provides very real-time monitoring and reporting on water quality data. So he's very aware of the impact that agriculture has on our waterways. He's also the author of the popular book and the very eye-opening book, The Swine Republic, Struggles with the Truth About Agriculture and Water Quality. He speaks all around the state. He's become a fearless advocate and has been for years, a fearless advocate for protecting our waterways and how agricultural practices need to change. So, Chris, I'm really glad you're here tonight, and I want to welcome you to the stage. Let me go.
So thanks for coming tonight. Thanks for having me. As Diane said, I travel the state and it's winding down a little bit, but I've driven thousands of miles over the last many months, and it's good to just drive 2 miles and come and talk. So, show you a few slides here and try to give you some idea of where the pollution's coming from in our streams and other drivers of what we see when we go out and we look at our streams.
Nobody can hear you on the webinar.
Oh, sorry. Yep, sorry. So I'm going to show you a few slides and we'll talk about where the pollution's coming from here. So there I am. I have a Substack if you're interested in it, where I write about these topics. There's my book, and so I invite you to check that out. And so I like to impress upon people that our water quality is intimately connected to the geological history here in Iowa. And of course, our geological history is one of glaciation. We think glaciers have intruded into Iowa 7 times in total, but 3 main glacial periods. The first one, the pre-Illinoisan period there from 2.5 million to 500,000 years ago. The Illinoisan period, where ice edged into southeast Iowa there, 300,000 to 130,000 years ago. And then the Wisconsin Glacier, which came down into north central Iowa from Minnesota. And this is the one we talk about a lot, and which has really affected water quality, especially in north central Iowa. I think everybody knows prior to settlement, most of our land looked like this. We had about 20% of it in wetlands, about 70% in prairie, and about 5% in oak savanna. And of course, that's all gone now, we know. Here's Iowa vegetation around 1850. We can see a grassland over much of the state. We had some forest in northeast Iowa especially, and in the river bottoms. And then here's Iowa today, and we have crops covering about 70% of our land. And so we only have two species out there on 70% of our land. And so we know nature likes diversity, right? And we're not going to get the environmental outcomes that we want when we only have two species out there. The other thing we have here in Iowa that's kind of unique, over 97% of our land is in private hands. This is a very high number. It's the second highest number in the country. And so when we try to improve the condition of our environment, we're going to have to do it on private land. Prior to settlement, this is what our prairie streams looked like. They were clear water systems. They were also shallow. They spilled out into the floodplain very frequently. We had the perennial plants on the riverbanks. There, the prairie, we had the clean water species of smallmouth bass and pumpkin seed sunfish, the generalist species of channel catfish. And again, in the bottom of the streams, we had sands and gravels where the desirable species could spawn. And the important thing to remember here too is the water table was very close to the surface here in Iowa during pre-settlement times. Then we got here about the same time John Deere invented the steel plow. We broke the prairie. The other big thing is we drained the land and we modified the hydrology. And so it's not just what we're using on the land that's impairing the water, you know, the pesticides, the fertilizers, the herbicides. It's also that we've modified the hydrology so radically. And so one of the big things is we drained the land. You can see the lower left there, the guys putting in the old clay field tiles. That's in Boone County, west of Ames, around 1910. Those tile sections were put down with gaps in between each one to allow water to seep in. Then the water discharged out to these trapezoidal ditches that we built with the steam shovels. And so there you can see one of those in the upper right. That's over by Ames. And so we've lowered the water table 4 feet all over Iowa. That's had consequences for our water quality. We continue to tile now. This is a good time of year to go out and drive around and see farmers tiling. You see these big spools of black plastic tile pervious pipe out in the fields. That's a tile plow that's pulled behind a tractor. And so tile is the primary delivery mechanism for nitrate from farm fields to the stream network. Okay. And so the fertilizers applied to the fields, it's converted to nitrate. That's very water soluble. The water percolates down through the soil profile, hits the tiles 4 feet down and out to the stream. That's where the nitrate comes from. The other thing we've done is we've straightened our streams. This is a picture of a stream in Jasper County, the Neil Smith National Wildlife Refuge. The green line there is the stream in 1930. The red line is the stream now. So we've cut that stretch of stream down from 1,000 meters down to 500 meters. But the vertical drop from point A to point B is the same, right? And so what we've done is we've energized that water. It travels a shorter distance laterally, but it drops the same amount. Well, that's caused that stream to erode downward, all right? It's eroded downward, and this has happened all over Iowa. And so this is Walnut Creek. And so we can see here, these two pictures were taken from the same spot. That stream, this is no kidding, can go from the top picture to the bottom picture and back to the top picture in 24 hours. And so our pre-settlement streams were not flashy. So none of our desirable species evolved to live in this hydrological condition. The other thing to remember is in that top photo there, that black dirt that you see, about that first 6 feet of it was deposited since settlement. So it's what we call unconsolidated. When the water comes up, that soil material is very vulnerable to erosion. And so as a consequence, our streams are always muddy. And you can see the stream banks sloughing down there into the stream. So now our streams look like this. They're all down in these canyons, right? And so when you drive across the countryside and you drive across a bridge and you look down at the stream, if you didn't know any better, you'd think that might be the natural condition of the stream. It's not. They've eroded downward. Now we have the pollution tolerant species, the carp and bullhead. We still have the generalist species of channel catfish. The sands and gravels in the stream bottom are silted in, and the water table is much, much deeper now. And so that on the right, that's the South Skunk River, southeast of Ames. And so we've straightened thousands of miles of streams here in Iowa. The other thing we've done is we've lost all the diversity in our farms. This is a very famous illustration here from Iowa DNR when they did a pheasant study in the 70s. This is a farm in Winnebago County in northern Iowa in 1941. You can see we have a large diversity of land uses on this farm. Yes, we have a lot of corn, but we also have oats, hay, alfalfa. We have woodlots, we have marshes. And then we fast forward to 1976, and that farm has been converted almost completely to corn and soybean. There's still some oats left in 1976. Those would be gone in the present day. So now this is what our farms look like, right? We have the nice clean fields of GMO corn and soybeans, not a weed in them in a lot of cases. We have the hog industry. We have 25 million hogs. You can drive across Iowa and never see a hog, right? That's because they're all in these buildings up on the horizon. And then we have the ethanol industry. And this all looks really clean. If you drive across and you don't know any better, you would think, gosh, this looks clean, but we know that there's consequences. Then we have, all the animals here. We have 8,000 CAFOs in Iowa that have required a construction permit across the state. And so this has had consequences for our water quality. The two main ones, soil erosion and the nutrient pollution. And the thing nobody wants to talk about here in Iowa is we have a problem of scale, okay? We have 70% of our land in corn and soy. We have 11,000 square miles of our land that's used for ethanol, to grow corn for ethanol. So we have 99 counties. Imagine an area of land the size of 20 counties. That's how much we've committed to ethanol production. We have 25 million hogs. We still have a sizable beef industry, 80 million laying chickens. This is probably down to about 60 million now because of bird flu and other things. 5 million turkeys, 4 million broiler chickens, and 240,000 dairy cows. So we have a huge scale of production here. This is an intensity of production like nowhere else on earth. And so can we get the environmental outcomes that we want when we're producing at this scale? I would say no. This has had consequences for our drinking water, as Diane said. Thousands of private wells contaminated. 1/3 of our public water supplies are vulnerable to nitrate contamination, and 25% of all Iowans are drinking municipal water that has been treated for nitrate reduction. It's also had consequences for surface water, the dead zone in the Gulf of Mexico, algae blooms in Lake Erie, a similar situation. The Gulf of Mexico algae mainly driven by nitrogen, the Lake Erie algae mainly driven by phosphorus. So what do we contribute? Well, Iowa has 3.3% of the land in the Missouri River Basin. We contribute 55% of the nitrate to the Missouri River from 3.3% of the land. We have 21% of the land in the upper Mississippi. We contribute 45% of the nitrate. And then down at the Gulf, we have 4.5% of the land. We contribute 29% of the nitrate and 15% of the phosphorus. So we are polluting at a continental scale. Okay, that's what you need to remember. What we're doing here is affecting water quality at the continental scale. Nitrate is our biggest problem for water quality. We have the nutrient strategy trying to address this. What's the economics of this? It costs a farmer 50 cents to buy a pound of nitrogen now. For the practices that are eligible for cost share through the nutrient strategy, it costs between $2 and $10 a pound to keep that out of the stream. So 50 cents to buy it, an average of $6 to keep it from entering the stream. How is that going to pencil out? It's not. So our average statewide nitrate load is 600 million pounds. We have a goal of a 45% reduction. That's 270 million pounds. So that's going to cost between 540 million and 2.7 billion per year just to address nitrate. We are never going to have enough money to address this in this strategy of providing cost share for BMPs. It's not going to happen. It's a fantasy. I talk a lot about ethanol. We see how land prices in Iowa have tracked in lockstep with the amount of ethanol produced in this country. There's a lot of young people that want to farm. They can't get into it because of the price of land. The calories from the corn that we use for ethanol exceed the caloric requirements of every person in the United States. Think about that. Ethanol also creates perversity around the country and agriculture around the country. We now grow corn in the high plains. We're depleting the Ogallala aquifer to irrigate that corn, and then we're sucking the Colorado River dry to irrigate alfalfa. Half of the Colorado River goes to irrigate alfalfa. That's a crop we could grow here without irrigation. Why don't we? It's because we've created a guaranteed market for corn with the renewable fuel standard and fuel ethanol. So what could we do? We need more diverse farming systems. This is Matt Liebman, retired from Iowa State. He spent his career studying these extended rotations. This one, corn, soy, oat, and then 2 years of alfalfa versus corn and soybeans. In the extended rotation, we reduce nitrogen fertilizer use 91%. We reduce herbicide 97%. The weed biomass is similar, even with the reduced herbicide use. Soybean health is better. Soil health is better. Tile nitrate is 57% lower in the extended rotation. Okay, remember the goal of the nutrient strategy, reduce it 45% at taxpayer expense. Here we reduce it 57% and it costs the taxpayer nothing. Soil erosion cut in half, fossil fuel use cut more than half, and the net returns to the farmer similar in the extended rotation. So why don't we do this, right? Why don't we do this? We need policy that helps farmers transition to these other systems. So ultimately, this is the question. What do we want the production system here to look like? Do we want a system designed for commerce, which is what we have? We have a system designed for commerce, or do we want a system that's designed for nutrition and environmental outcomes? So that's all my slides. Thanks for coming, and hopefully we'll talk later.
So you just heard how nitrates get into our waterway. So now I'm going to invite Audrey Tran Lam to speak about how and why that nitrate is bad for our health. So Audrey has a master's degree in public health from the University of Iowa and a graduate certificate from Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health that focuses on food systems and the environment. She currently serves as the Environmental Health Program Director at the University of Northern Iowa's Center for Energy and Environmental Education. And there she leads a host of different environmental health initiatives. And Audrey serves on a long list of boards. I'm not even going to go through all of them. There's so many of them. And for that, she provides a lot of her public health expertise. I'm really glad you can be with us here tonight. I want to welcome Audrey.
Thank you. Thank you so much for the intro and for the invitation. And thank you, Chris, for setting up the rest of our talks so well. We are limited to 10 minutes to sort of give you the topic spiel that we've been sort of assigned for the evening, which, I mean, before Chris, I thought was going to be impossible, but I thought he did a really amazing job. So I'm going to be talking about nitrates and human health. And sort of the headline of this evening was the cancer connection, right? I always like to offer just like a short disclaimer before jumping into a talk that, dovetails so closely to a topic that's so important to Iowa right now. And that is, I'm not a cancer expert. My expertise, my education is in environmental health and in population health. I'm really, really interested in the overlap of ecological sustainability, human health, and how that is sort of layered in the Midwest by agriculture and toxic chemical application exposure. So that's sort of like my happy place nexus and sort of where I'm coming from this evening. So I do think a lot about pesticides, and I hope we get a chance to talk a little bit about that later too. But I'm going to try to give an overview relatively quickly on nitrates. And I'm going to make sure I keep myself on track just because it's kind of hard to see the clock over here. So in addition to that disclaimer was the disclaimer I gave earlier about trying to cram all of this into a short talk, right? Here's my tentative outline this evening, right? I want to give an overview of some regulatory considerations as we think about sort of the context of exposure in the Midwest, how nitrate may lead to cancer. I think that's actually probably one of the most interesting things about maybe this slide deck is sort of how does nitrate contribute to cancer and ill health effects. We'll address populations of concern, like who that could be exposed are we most worried about. And then a very, very high level overview of health issues, both in children and in adults. And I want to just give a huge shout out to my colleagues at the University of Nebraska Medical Center for allowing me to borrow some material for tonight's talk. They do a lot of really, really excellent work with nitrates and human health over there at the Water Center, especially looking at pediatric cancer. So I would strongly recommend them as a resource if this is a topic of interest to you, especially from the human health side of things. Okay, so hopefully that all sounds okay to you, and hopefully you're all following me with how quickly I'll talk tonight. Okay, so the regulatory limits of nitrate. Some of you probably already know this, and I would wager you probably all know this. But the regulatory limits of nitrate in drinking water are actually set to protect against acute health harms, right? Not health harms as a result of chronic low dose exposure over time. The Environmental Protection Agency's MCL, or maximum contaminant level, limit is 10 parts per million of nitrate nitrogen. And that's a level that's not enforced in private wells, right? It's a safe drinking water standard that really only gets enforced and regulated at the public drinking water level, which is why people drinking from wells are particularly vulnerable from nitrate exposure. But this acute health harm that we're really worried about is something called methemoglobinemia or blue baby syndrome. So babies that are 6 months old or younger that are formula fed using tap water that may have high levels of nitrates are at risk of having their sort of the oxygen that's sort of supposed to hang on to the hemoglobin in the blood, having that displaced by the nitrates. And so these babies won't be able to really oxygenate tissues very well, and they literally turn blue. So that's blue baby syndrome. It can be fatal. And so it's really good that we have this protective limit. But like I said, the EPA's MCL is set for an acute health harm, not necessarily something that we would maybe see drinking lower doses of nitrate over a longer period of time. There's actually been quite a lot of studies that have looked at the relationship of nitrate to human health. And we know that high concentrations of nitrate in drinking water has been linked to adverse health outcomes. And actually, even sort of moderate or low levels of nitrate have been linked to human health outcomes. The strongest links in the literature are sort of lumped into the acute and the chronic. These minor health ailments, which sort of I'll run through a little bit later, methemoglobinemia, the blue baby syndrome that I just talked about, preterm birth issues, including sort of spontaneous abortion, sort of early delivery and labor, low birth weight. We're worried about birth defects with exposure to nitrates during pregnancy. And then there's pediatric cancers and adult cancers. Okay, so this is the slide that I'm actually like pretty interested and excited about. This is used often by the National Institutes of Health to sort of talk about what compounds in this sort of process of nitrate exposure are actually maybe the probable human carcinogens. So some of you may not know this, but nitrate isn't actually the thing that we're worried about with the cancer link. It's sort of the transformation products that are worrisome. So when we are exposed to nitrate through drinking water, through diet, the bacteria in our mouths start converting that nitrate into nitrite. And then when that combines with compounds in your stomach acid, it further transforms into these N-nitroso compounds, or these NOCs. And it's those that that IARC and other sort of public health bodies of authority are sort of pointing to as the probable human carcinogen in this sort of biological mechanism here. This process is also catalyzed by heme iron, so the iron that's found in red meat, and by compounds in cigarette smoke, but it's inhibited by antioxidants or vitamin C. And there's actually quite a lot that we could talk about here when it comes to dietary exposure to nitrates. So maybe nitrates that you would get through fruit and vegetable consumption. That we could get into, and sort of why we worry a little bit less about fruit and vegetables containing high nitrates, mostly because of the package, the whole food package that they come in that has a lot of antioxidants. But we will save that for another time. We're really focused on dietary intake of nitrate through water as being problematic because of how it transforms into those NOCs. Hopefully you're all with me so far. Okay. Populations of concern. So we're in public health. We're always thinking about particularly vulnerable populations to exposures or to social determinants of health. Agricultural chemical exposures, no exception. There are categories of people that we worry a little bit more about. Pregnant women and their fetus. This is of high concern given what we know about some of the maternal health outcomes that we're seeing in the literature. And given that it's such a short window and an extremely important window of development, we're seeing that there's some pretty not great health outcomes that if we have time, maybe we'll talk a little bit more about. Young infants, like I said earlier, those that are 6 months of age and younger, and young children are at risk. And then people with oxygen transport or delivery conditions, things like anemia, cardiovascular disease, the presence of hemoglobin abnormalities, those folks are at risk of nitrate exposure, particularly at acute or higher levels. And then, of course, people with high nitrate in their well, right? And that's, kind of code for rural populations, right? People who rely on well water for sort of all of their needs. So these are the folks that we're particularly worried about with nitrate exposure. So these health issues in children that show up a lot in the literature, multiple health issues have been identified in children, right? Of course, the acute, but then we also have evidence that pediatric brain cancer has been linked to nitrate exposure, and then non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. And very interestingly, the non-Hodgkin's lymphoma point, there was a study done actually out of Nebraska in 2013 that showed that there was a 3-fold increase in risk associated with nitrates and atrazine as sort of a combination, which, this is something that I really, really like talking about because it's very rare that we are exposed to sort of one thing at a time, right? We're not really sort of living in silos where, today I'm going to be exposed to nitrates, tomorrow I'll be exposed to atrazine, the day after I'll be exposed to BPA, whatever. We're sort of swimming around in a chemical soup that may or may not have some interactions that we're just unaware of, because that's not typically how we study chemical interactions or chemicals in the environment, chemicals in human health. For adults, The acute health harms, we typically see that just sort of as increased heart rate, this nausea, headaches, abdominal cramping. But chronic exposure, there's some pretty strong evidence that links nitrates with colorectal cancer, thyroid disease, kidney cancer, bladder cancer, and non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. I'm only just now realizing that ovarian cancer is not on this slide, but there has been some evidence also that shows that there might be a relationship there as well. I mentioned at the top of the presentation that I'm borrowing some of these slides from some colleagues at the University of Nebraska Medical Center. And so I learned that there's also a link between nitrate exposure and Alzheimer's, diabetes, and Parkinson's disease. So if you have questions about that, I don't think I'll be able to answer them, but I know the people who would be. So let me know if you have questions about that, and I can try to get in touch with folks. There are a lot of studies, sort of like I mentioned earlier, that look at the relationship between nitrates and human health. And if these slides are going to be made available to folks after this evening, I sort of put together just sort of low-hanging fruit bibliography. That's what I like to call it. It's sort of very frequently cited studies in this genre of public health literature for you all to sort of reference, just knowing that this is not an exhaustive list. And I've also included, because I'm sort of right out of time here, a slide on non-cancer maternal and fetal health issues associated with nitrate exposure during pregnancy, in case you all are interested in those outcomes as well. But that's sort of here as a bonus since I'm out of time. Thank you very much for your attention, and I'm really excited about our discussion afterwards. Thanks.
Thank you, Audrey. And this meeting is being recorded, so that information will be available. And if anybody is interested in getting the slides themselves, let us know at the Iowa Alliance, info@Iowa responsibleagriculture.org. And you're going to be getting an email from us anyway with the link to the recording. So, we'll stay in touch with all of that. Great. Well, first of all, Audrey, thank you. That was really exactly what we needed to hear, to understand how nitrates are impacting us. And I appreciate that whole long list of studies you've got on there. I think that'll be really good for us to reference. Now, unfortunately, nitrates aren't the only threat to our health. And we've invited Mary Jo Forbord. She's going to be joining us right here via Zoom from Prairie Horizons, her family farm in western Minnesota. Mary Jo is a registered dietitian and fifth-generation farmer. She works to promote a deep understanding of the connections between health, soil, nourishing food, clean water, and healthy people. She's got a background in healthcare and community nutrition. She was the executive director of the Sustainable Farming Association and also worked as health eating coordinator at the University of Minnesota at Morris. So Mary Jo, thank you so much for being here with us tonight, and I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you. Hello, Iowa, and everyone online. It's nice to be with you. You've heard a lot of evidence this evening. I have a degree in science, and I want to tell you something that you don't often hear in science or maybe take seriously. It's an anecdote. It's an anecdote that is my life. And I have a short time here to talk, and probably about a minute a decade as I figure. So I'm going to get started, and I'm going to tell you a little bit of my story. And you can probably weave some of the evidence in and out of this story because it may be a story that's quite common in farm country. I was born into a farm family in the 1950s. Everyone in our family of 7 had some kind of responsibility on the farm. It was just a given that the farm needed to feed the family and feed the animals and grow the crops and haul some of those cash crops to town to the elevator sell for living expensive. Life was outdoors. It was in the garden and in the fields and often in the kitchen, cooking and processing food for a large family, for work crew dinners. And then, as I remember my earliest days, the Shakopee Creek, this cool, gigantic cottonwood oasis that was just a short dash away from the farmhouse, clear, cold, flowing water, abundant fish, And then my earliest memory was of our farm flooding, 1957. The farm was underwater, our animals became sick. I remember it being a time of tension and sadness. And not long after, the Shakopee Creek was dredged and deepened and channelized. All the cottonwood trees, the gigantic trees, were felled, and my dad was one of the first ones to tile in. Now we could predictably get a crop from what had been an intermittent wetland. Life was good. In the 1960s, I attended the same one-room country school that my dad and grandpa had attended, along with a dozen or so neighbor kids who traveled the same gravel road to and from school, the same 12 kids and the same teacher for 6 years. We had a telephone at the school, and that's where the news came that President Kennedy had been assassinated. We watched his funeral on television, which was the new technology of the day. Farming had become globalized with ever more pressure on exports to feed the world from our breadbasket, from our riches, from our Great Plains in the USA. But before the decade was out, my brothers had been drafted to the Vietnam War, and a river in Ohio had caught fire 14 times. And that caught enough attention of enough people that the first Earth Day was launched. I remember the 70s as being a time of civil rights and women's rights, everything from Kent State to Watergate. And for me, a ray of hope for better days ahead, for peace and for health. The Senate Select Committee on Nutrition and Human Needs had released the first dietary goals for the United States that were shifting the dietary guidance from getting enough nutrients to avoiding too much foods that could lead to chronic disease. This is when I became a registered dietitian to unleash the power of nutrition and food to prevent disease, and the whole country seemed energized to do it. I didn't think my farm upbringing really had that much to do with it. The land went to women and not to men. My connection to the land would have been severed forever. And I perhaps wouldn't have even missed it because at the time, farming was a pretty much male thing to do. And further, it had sort of this aura that you did it if you couldn't do anything else. You had to get an education to get out, especially females. Well, surprise, the 1980s came and I married a farmer. And 5 years later, we bought the 480-acre dairy farm he grew up on, 20 miles from the farm where I grew up. We worked as hard as dairy farmers do and paid for the farm with the milk checks. We're proud of the product that we produced and how we produced it. And we fought the advent of biotechnology into farming, which was known as bovine growth hormone. But farmers, even organic farmers, were persuaded by the industry that if they didn't support this technology, those clueless consumers that you have to feed anyway would be standing on your neck and thwarting every new technology that is coming down the pike. It worked. Sound familiar? We're up to the 1990s, which is a very pivotal time for us when we nearly lost our unvaccinated herd of dairy cattle to an airborne virus. After a fairly slow recovery, we opted to take the advice of nearly everyone we trusted in the industry, namely, just do whatever you can to increase your production because the price of commodity milk is volatile and lots of times below the cost of production. Our veterinarian and our bovine nutritionist assured us we were only hurting ourselves by not adopting this technology as most, maybe a third of the farmers had that were already on the milk truck. So our milk was shipped to Florida and other tankers were bringing milk to Minnesota from happy cows in California. The food system really at that point stopped making sense. And I began to see more of the invisible strings controlling the commodity of farmer, especially when asked to sign a 12-page contract that redefined stewardship as protecting patented seeds that you bought but didn't own. These seeds held a very revolutionary technology that would withstand what we were told was a kinder, gentler herbicide, glyphosate. This would reduce herbicide use. That's when we really felt that to go that route of farming is something that we needed to try to escape from. And we began to plan our escape from that type of farming. It's not easy to do. But at the turn of the century, I feel that we were in luck. There was a brand new EQIP program from the NRCS that would help convert row crops to grass, cost share on infrastructure for grazing. And I was already looking into the nutritional attributes of grass-fed meat, which was higher in omega-3 and really the fat of the land, a very different kind of fat than a corn-fed animal. And then through some progressive leadership at the time from the Minnesota NRCS that led the nation in the organic transition, we began to convert the farm just field by field to organic. And surprisingly to us, after we got over our fear about what are we going to do if we're not using antibiotics, what are we going to do when the animals get sick, we began to enjoy the fewer inputs, especially farming without pesticides, the life that would spring up that we didn't even know about. So diversity exploded, and the land and the cattle were teaching us what they could do, and lots about farming with nature. It was a new day. But then the 2010s arrived, and this I call the brutal decade in farming, especially for us. It began with our 22-year-old son's funeral. For 15 months, we had battled synovial sarcoma, a rare but increasingly common form of childhood cancer. We battled it with everything we had and everything custom medical care had. Through 2 LifeLink air ambulances, 2 ground ambulance rides, 2 Thanksgiving at Mayo hospitals, only to spread his ashes here on his 23rd birthday on the farm he loved. So grief is an animal. It had me by the neck for many years. I couldn't talk. But then in 2016, Laverne, my husband, had a very grim and I won't have time to go into the gory details, but he was poisoned by a cocktail of chemicals from the farm across the way. Now our farmers are not neighbors. They're coming from 50 miles away and farm over thousands of acres in many counties. They're here to do a job. They don't care what the wind speed is. We know that the laws on the label is the law, but they won't be enforced. And the upshot is it's okay to lay huge piling rotted corpses of turkeys that have been euthanized during the avian flu and not at all composted, and spread the bedding that it contains insecticides so that it goes across our organic acres. We learned during that there is no medical crosswalk from the agricultural chemicals to toxification in the ER is usually related to an overdose and not farm chemicals for most doctors. So we learned there is no crosswalk, and our regulatory systems that are supposed to protect us do not and will not. The good news is that my brother is a Hodgkin's lymphoma survivor. My sister is a salivary gland cancer survivor, and my other brother is a non-Hodgkin's lymphoma survivor. I am not a cancer expert, but I feel like it. The 2020s, we all remember COVID hitting. And for me, I was working on campus when it shut down. And I became a frontline worker and manager at the county food shelf that closed because its volunteers were of the age group that were said to, not be able to survive COVID. We had lots to do in flipping the food shelf. And that's when 45 years of a dietetics career, that was kind of my capstone project, where indeed our food system does not make sense. It makes profits for some, especially for multinational ag suppliers. And here on the farm in the 2020s, we have the infrastructure for rotational grazing. And if you're familiar with the Conservation Security Program, it's a 5-year contract for whole farm management for ecological and restorative farming. After 3 contracts, 15 years of conservation, we have walked the gangplank of farm programs. There's nothing for us. So the only thing that we are supporting is the other side of the fence, which is killing everything but what the seed dealer owns, the supplier of the seeds that the farmer doesn't own. So that's our competition, and you're paying for that, and so are we. So we've accumulated these environmental benefits, and now it's up to us to maintain them on our own through our own subsidies. But in the meantime, we are subsidizing pollution, soil erosion, and monoculture, you and I, through crop insurance and other annual subsidies, mainly for corn and beans. They dominate, they rule, and back at the Shakopee Creek, CAFOs are proliferating and expanding. The Shakopee Creek is the most impaired tributary to the Chippewa River, which flows into the Minnesota River, which flows into the Mississippi, and likely coming to a tap near you. At least you may have municipal water treatment. Well owners, you're on your own completely. And I must say, this past summer, with the ending and the drought and the wind, it was the first time I thought of prairie fires, and I thought of ethanol, and I thought of all the corn, dried corn, being right at the same time. And I hope we don't have to bleed all the resiliency out of the system and have our midsection of our country burn, because we have a whole lot of fuel out there that's ripe at the same time. So onward. When were we healthy, and how do we regain health? Back to the good old days when type 2 diabetes was called adult onset because kids didn't get it. And now almost 50% of the diagnoses are under the age of 18. Do we roll it back to before petroleum, before plastics, before pesticides, before our water was polluted with all of the above? Plus the contaminants of emerging concern, that black box of stuff that we don't understand but are still leaving as a legacy to future generations. I think if given the choice, they'd take the clean drinking water. So thank you very much for inviting me. That's my anecdote.
Thank you, Mary Jo. That's a really moving story, and it's a sad story, and it's a sad story about our agricultural system that we live in right now. And I look forward to the day when we can really start to turn this around, because this is not the way we should be living. So, you know, so far we understand that we have water quality issues. We understand, we've heard why, you know, nitrates and agricultural chemicals are bad for our health. What we haven't really understood in some ways is why the Iowa State Legislature doesn't do something about this. You know, why the Iowa legislature doesn't protect the health and well-being of Iowans, you know, and that includes farmers, you know. So to address this, I'm going to give this back to Chris Jones, who's got a very intimate understanding of why things are not changing for the better yet in Iowa.
I think the reason things don't change, it's complicated, right? And I think at the base level, it's because we don't demand that they change as citizens. And, you know, we can blame the politicians, we can blame one or other of the political parties, but the truth of the matter is the population here in Iowa has tolerated this for a long time. And why we tolerate it, I don't really know. I think, you know, a lot of us have roots, or, you know, we have relatives that farmed, or we farmed, or our dad farms, or our uncle, or what have you. And I think we have, we can trace our roots back to the farm, many of us that grew up here, as I did. And so we're reluctant to lean on farmers. We have this this image of the farmer, this myth has been created of the farmer as this pillar of society, right? And that they can do no wrong. And I think as a result, we don't ask them to change. The farmers feel like they can't change because they are locked into this system by agribusiness, as we've just heard here. And so we just don't have the momentum or the impetus here to create change. I think if we held our legislators accountable and demanded these things and voted them out when things didn't change, you know, that would be a start. But, you know, we just do not hold the people responsible accountable. And so that's the base reason why things don't change. You know, things are really entrenched here. There's huge money behind all these things. We oftentimes want to look at the farmer, but we really fail sometimes to look at the infrastructure around us. It's not just the farmer or even mostly the farmer. You look at what we have here to support this production system. We have the roads. We have more roads in Iowa per capita than any, or per area of land than any other state. Why is that? It's to get the grain out. We have the trucking industry. We have the rail industry. We have the lock and dam system on the Mississippi River. We have the insurance industry. Des Moines is a big insurance capital for a reason, right? We have the manufacturing industry, John Deere and Vermeer and others that are making equipment for agriculture. I mean, these are good jobs, right? A lot of them are union jobs that we consider to be good jobs. And so we have all this built infrastructure that relies on farmers continuing to do what they're doing right now. And so we need some vision here. What is the system that we want? Let's define that, and then let's start working towards that. And we need someone or some group of someones to define that.
Thank you, Chris. And that's the hope, you know, working with the Iowa Alliance, working with other organizations in the state, you know, working together to really put that together and really, you know, energize people, you know, and that's the whole goal of meetings like this and you know, different actions that we can take. It's to energize people, because I think people are kind of, you know, I think people have accepted what they shouldn't be accepting, you know, and that it's up to us to help change that. And that's why I really would thank you and everyone for being here, because this is what we're trying to do, get that energy in so we can make these changes start to happen. So, you know, I'm going to take a little different turn right now. You know, obviously things aren't ideal, you know, with how we're practicing agriculture in Iowa and beyond, but there are steps that we can take to protect ourselves and our loved ones. And one of the ways is to locate and eat responsibly raised, clean food. And not only is that healthier for us, but what it does is it supports and helps to grow a healthier local foods system in Iowa. And so our next speaker, Michelle Kenyon, is going to tell us kind of how we can get there, how we can do that, and what we can do right now. Michelle is the executive director of Field to Family. And Field to Family is a comprehensive regional food hub and market. It has partnerships with producers, institutions, and community members in the area here. It's really a great resource for people in the Iowa City and surrounding areas. Michelle has organized several different initiatives at Field to Family, including a farm to school program and an online farmers markets. And she's going to talk to us tonight about how to access healthy foods through food hubs, CSAs, farmers markets, and other avenues. So Michelle, thank you for coming and sharing with us tonight.
Right. Hi, everyone. Thank you for that nice introduction, Diane, and for having me here. I am not sure if I can be heard. Let's see. I'm a little shook right now. This has been incredibly informative panel discussion. I live in a bubble. I'll tell you that. I'm really focused on the work that we're doing and our goals. I'm really thankful to hear these stories and to learn more about the challenges of our current system. So I'm going to dive in a little bit about the organization Field to Family. We're really focused on increasing access to healthy and local foods, and also providing that education and that food system education that's required for people to better understand how to make food choices every day. We have been around a while. Field to Family has appeared in many different avenues in this community. We started off as a food festival, celebrating local food and the culinary excellence of our chefs. We brought the farm to school through educational programs and then working very closely with school nutrition directors to understand procurement and their food system needs for their cafeterias, as well as bringing the farm to school through farmer fairs and school gardens. And then we also were a local chapter of Buy Fresh, Buy Local, where we promoted local food, local farms, and all the places you can get it. And then ultimately, we worked with the county. Johnson County launched a food policy council back in 2012, and we did a comprehensive analysis of our food system and our biggest challenges and what were some of the gaps. And we identified several gaps, and what climbed to the top was the need for more of a wholesale availability of local food. Because with our Farm to School chapter, we were working to procure local for the school system, but at the time, the school was serving 6,000. This one school district here, Iowa City Community Schools, they were serving 6,000 kids a day. So for local to get into that kitchen, well, we needed more local food availability. So our goal was to scale up, but we also, the infrastructure wasn't there for it, right? So we knew we had to build the infrastructure. We studied the local food system here, what's already built up infrastructure. And these are older studies here, but they haven't changed much because even after the study that came out that talked about how far our food traveled, we as a nation adopted policies that allowed more imports from more countries, which did happen. And so we continued to have that big distance where our food continues to travel. There's generally accepted facts about our global food system that we just have inequitable access. We have planned food waste, like it's intentional to have food waste. And Chris and other speakers have covered a lot of the other components of this. So ultimately, we're looking at the prize. We're looking at building new infrastructure for a community-based food system. We know from research that has been done by Johns Hopkins about what the benefits are of food systems. When we actually invest in them, we're investing in our health, we're investing in our economy, and we're investing in our environment. We know that that it takes a lot of inputs and outputs to build this system and to feed ourselves. We know we can do that in a way that that can actually enhance our health and enhance our environment, enhance our economy. It comes down to knowing our farmers, though. Generally, community food systems are more likely to promote healthier diets, support small businesses, mitigate climate change, all these positive things you can see from work that has been done by Johns Hopkins and others. Now, I'm here to talk to you about Field to Family. There are many, many people who make our food system what it is, and there are many organizations and initiatives at the state and local level working on a community food system basis. We're doing a very focused area. We cannot do it all, but by running a food hub, you still only know one food hub if you know one. So it's generally an entity that aggregates, procures, and stores and distributes and markets local food. For Field to Family, our goal is to increase access to healthy and local foods, providing that food system education that's required to do so. We ultimately know that we can only do so much, and partnerships are key. So we work very closely with schools. We work very closely with producers. We provide the education that's needed to get them to access local foods and operate the food hub. It takes a lot of partners to make this happen. We've been growing this list now since we launched in 2019. But ultimately, it's a lot of hands-on work. And when we talk about building infrastructure, we're really talking about that. We're not driving down the straight and narrow road. We're not looking at something pretty and clean. It is not always easy. We are trying to get producers' crops to where they're needed and how they're needed. We're doing this in a way where we focus on wholesale for sure. That's our number one. 90% of the work that we do is cases of foods delivered wholesale. We also offer an online market still here in Iowa City because we're still working to leverage our producers to be able to grow more, and they have to start somewhere. They can't fill a case yet, so they can give you a bunch. We start them where they can. And then we work with other food hubs in the state. It's really amazing how we've been seeing them grow and their capacity grow. So we're able to get products from Farm Table, which is based in Western Iowa, here when we need them and when our producers don't have them here. And when our producers have extras here, then we're able to get them there. Ultimately, it's about knowing seasonality. This is what we talk about all the time. We're working with school nutrition directors who are used to reading their options and having very clear choices from the distributor they have a contract with. They do not need to think about seasonality when it comes to that. We need to get in their menu. Their menus, they take a month, it's usually a month out to get on there. So we need to work with them. Production is another thing. While we have some schools that love to shuck corn, we have a lot of schools that don't have the capacity, interest, or desire. Producer partnerships are key to this. We started off working with about 12 producers. We had to start where we could. Wholesale was very important. We were a young food hub, so we needed to work with experienced wholesale producers. So ultimately, that's what we started off with. Luckily, we were able to work with many of them to start new farmers just to be able to start growing smaller amounts, but then year after year, they would find new markets, including markets with us, and they would be able to provide more foods. So we work really hard now we're actively purchasing from about 80 producers. This takes a lot of training and time to get them wholesale ready. Again, like some of them aren't there yet, so that's why we offer the online market still. Relationship building is so important, and there's my timer. So I'm just going to tell you now that yes, we are a food hub here based in Iowa City. We serve a lot of different institutions now, over 20 counties, which has been a game changer for our organization. We've had to level up our infrastructure, our storage. We're bursting at the seams. We need more food storage. But ultimately, it's been an amazing experience to be able to work with, 36 school nutrition directors, 24 food access agencies. And then, of course, we still have regular, restaurants and caterers that are looking for us. And what we provide is mostly produce, 51%. But ultimately, it's about the access to and education for. We have more information available. You can order from field to family in multiple languages. And then we also want to get the word out that, hey, we are one access point. We know we are not perfect. We may not be able to get you what you need. Most people go to the grocery store for their food. So when you do go to the grocery store, look for the signage, ask their definition of local, think seasonal also, what's in season, what's out. Direct from producers, CSAs, and farmers markets are amazing here, and choose them first when you can. If you can access them, we have a great farmers market, so does Cedar Rapids. And then agritourism is still growing here. It's amazing. It's a great opportunity. So there's a couple links to find these access points. And then there's a couple more events coming up. In fact, there's a happy hour tomorrow Lone Tree, all local foods. So anyway, this is more, please connect with us. We are always looking for help on our advisory council. That's my time. Thank you so much.
Michelle, thank you. It's so nice to see that these options are here, you know, and it's exciting. And I know I always enjoy so much more the food I can get from our local farmers market in Fairfield and everything. So I encourage you all to check out Field to Family on their website, order from them, look for local in stores. So thank you for making that presentation. That's like the ray of hope that we're going to just be focusing on growing, you know. So we have maybe about 15 minutes or so that we can do some questions and answers.
How do each one of you on the panel feel about Senator Grassley, our long-serving senator in Iowa, and perhaps you might comment on Joni Ernst, the other senator. How do you map them on the entire discussion you're making? What are they going to do about the environment and food production, that sort of thing? Because it seems to me, as Republicans, they must be besieged by agribusiness lobbyists, because they would, as Republicans, might be seen to be more business friendly.
Well, I'll say that Grassley supported wind energy here in Iowa. That's good. When Joni Ernst ran for the Senate the first time, there were some doubts whether she was for ethanol. And if you remember, the Iowa corn growers actually endorsed Bruce Braley against her, the Democrat, when she ran the first time. So now I think she's come around, right, and supports all that stuff. But the thing I want to impress upon people is that this system that we have is bipartisan, right? It is bipartisan. So we have Sherrod Brown, although he got beat, probably the most liberal member of the U.S. Senate, other than maybe Bernie. He was an ethanol guy. Sherrod Brown was an ethanol guy. Amy Klobuchar in Minnesota, she's very much pro-ethanol. And so we have people in Congress that are perceived as liberal that are really much in support of the current production system. And that's why it's entrenched and it's so difficult to dislodge it.
I feel like, Chris, that was a very good answer. And it feels like a safe answer, you know. It is a very, it is a bipartisan system, right? And I think that we would have surprising individuals in favor of surprising things just based on political party. So I think we need to sort of expand sort of what it means to be civically engaged and how critically think about what health looks like in Iowa, what the landscape looks like in Iowa, and kind of go from there.
Let me take one from our online visitors. Obesity is considered a high risk for some cancers. How can this be related to the ag-related causes?
Could you repeat that one more time?
Sure. Obesity is considered a high risk for some cancers. How can this be related to ag-related causes?
I feel like this might be a local foods question almost. Like, I mean, one of the really shocking statistics to me is that, you know, like upwards of 86% of food that comes into Iowa is not grown here, right? So we've got this locally produced problem. We have sort of the scale that Chris talked about, conspiring to make sort of like not a really amazing food environment for Iowans. And so, I mean, I really think that this plays a large part to the overall baseline population of Iowa, like where our food comes from, what our agricultural system looks like locally. I'm not quite sure how to get more specific than that right now, just sort of with the time that we have this evening, but food, farming, agriculture, agricultural chemicals, pesticide treadmill, these are all issues related to public health and definitely influence, I think, downstream health outcomes on a population level. So I'm sorry if that's an unsatisfying answer.
I
Thank
can
you.
also weigh in on that if you wish.
Oh. Yes, please.
Obesity has doubled since the 1970s. It's multifactorial. It's related to our commodity production going into ultra processed foods. There's also some things about the gut microbiome relating to the soil microbiome that are not completely understood, but becoming more understood. Questions about whether glyphosate acts as an antibiotic in the gut and wreaks havoc, really causing a number of diseases. Farming is very high stress. So in farm country, you have a very high rate of obesity. Mental health is a huge issue, and lack of exercise because much of farming has been mechanized. So I think it's multifactorial and certainly not turning a corner for anybody, for men, for women, for children, for yeah, we need to get a handle on a number of things, but it starts with commodity crops being turned into ultra processed foods and perhaps some gut and brain types of connections.
Thank you very much for being here and the presentation. We heard earlier about the report about Iowa cancer rates going up and binge drinking or alcohol consumption being explained as one of the reasons. Can you say more about like why that why are you skeptical of that? Who's doing that research? What's the science behind that? And why is that not a satisfactory explanation? Is there something more that we need to understand about like why that was identified as kind of like one of the primary drivers for the increase in cancer rates and why we should be skeptical of that?
I feel like you're looking at me, but if there any panelists want to take a stab at that first, I'd be more than happy to let you. You look like you're thinking, Chris, so I'll let you maybe.
Well, it's coming from the Iowa Cancer Institute, which is here at the University of Iowa. And, you know, this is not my field of authority. Okay. So I want to say, put a caveat on there. And what I'll say about this is, you know, these cancers, right? There's lots of things that factor into it, including how old the population is. And so you might have certain areas of the state where the population is more elderly than others. There's those sorts of things. There's the behaviors, obviously. And so if there are other drivers out there like binge drinking or age or smoking or exposure to the sun or whatever, that does not mean we shouldn't reduce exposure from these things that we know are a risk to human health, right? And so these personal behaviors that we have, it's really hard to change those sorts of things, you know, through policy. If there's a lot of binge drinking, well, what policy do you come up with to reduce that? It's difficult. Is it difficult to come up with a policy that reduces the exposure of nitrate in drinking water? No, it is not. It's not difficult to do that. And so where we can develop policy that reduces exposures, we should do that.
I like to think about cancer sort of in this multifactorial way as well, right? There are, I think, some things that are considered like low-hanging fruit that we can sort of act on, and it feels very approachable, especially at an individual level. I think there are some recommendations. Stop smoking, for example. It's one that public health really likes to latch onto because it's something that's pretty easy to wrap your head around. It's cause and effect, right? When it comes to environmental factors, there are so many things that contribute to whether or not a disease develops layered on top of your genetics, layered on top of sort of, you know, the chemical soup that I referenced earlier that we're sort of swimming in. So I think that like based on the data that we have in Iowa, there are these like areas in which we notice that Iowans are sort of like could use some work in. Maybe binge drinking is one of those things, right? We do know though that we have some other things of major concern that even if we are waiting for that 100% certainty, right, that may never come. even though evidence is mounting saying that this looks like it's problematic on a population scale, that it's just sort of like, more or less approachable to make certain recommendations, if that sort of makes sense. Yeah. Yeah. That's a really good question. That's a really good question.
Okay, first of all, a comment that this viewer appreciates us serving water in glass bottles, in glass mason jars. And then let's do a question on the Farm Bill. Farm Bill would appear to be an opportunity for input. What are your suggestions? What do we need to ask federal officials to do?
Well, in 1985, we got conservation compliance in the Farm Bill, and that required farmers that were cropping on highly erodible land to develop a soil conservation plan if they wanted to participate in the federal farm programs. If they didn't do that, then they weren't eligible for crop subsidies. We know that worked. It reduced soil erosion on these acres, and we know that it improved water clarity in Iowa streams. Why can't we do conservation compliance for nutrients? That is our big problem here, nutrient pollution. That's the nitrate in the water that we think is causing the cancer. And so if a farmer's going to be eligible for publicly subsidized crop insurance, why can't we make that farmer have some conservation compliance on nutrients, just like we did for the soil conservation plans in the 1985 Farm Bill?
I think we could incentivize for what we want instead of what we don't want. If we want clean water, that should be incentivized. If we want good health, that should be incentivized. If we don't want soil erosion, that should be incentivized or even penalized if need be. But we can't incentivize what we don't want. Our system is not based on health, and what I hear is that we want better health, and I have always believed that, but we're really going to have to stop rearranging the deck chairs on the Titanic and really start to steer the Titanic as I see it. Monoculture is a Titanic away from that, and that's toward diversity. That's toward a concentration on locally, regionally produced foods in the face of climate change. It's having more farmers, more diverse farmers, perhaps not larger operations, and then not co-opting the conservation programs, because I've noticed with the conservation security program, there's no practices left for someone like us. The practices and all the big money has been taken up with methane digesters of a scale that fits a mega dairy. So it's one thing to start a program with good intentions. It's quite another thing to make it continue to give you the outcomes and incentives that you want. But I think that's what we need to decide on is what do we want out of our food system? If we're not getting it, then we need to incentivize what we want and not what we don't want.
Great. Thank you so much. First of all, Chris, I wanted to say I get your Substack and I always both look forward to it and dread it and sort of at the same time. So, but thank you so much. So a lot of what we're talking about here is big system change and multiple systems. And so, we can vote differently, we can spend our money differently, but how do we get so many people that we know in our lives who are maybe they're kind of interested, they know a little, but they just can't quite be bothered to go the next step? Any thoughts on that to help move some of these things forward?
Yeah, well, thank you, Jen. It's a good question. I'll tell you, I grew up in a household where we really had a lot of trust in grocery stores. Whatever was available was safe. So go get whatever you want. They also didn't have a lot of experience eating fresh food. And so when I was able to take them out to the field, clip off from some freshly grown asparagus, put it in my mouth, put it in their hands and put it in their mouth, they were shocked at what I did, but then amazed by the taste. This is how we try to do it. We try to taste fresh, taste it right from the ground. It is different. We're used to something else. We're used to something shelf stable. Some apples have been picked a year before we've gotten them, the opportunity to try them. We grow, our system is based on the large scale, so we grow that way and distribute that way. So finding that good recipe with that good fresh food is one idea, but also let them know, if they don't already know, that not everything's safe to eat in the grocery store.
So I think one of the main things you can do is to encourage people to garden. And so I think now, so many people in our country, the only participation they have in the food system is eating it, right? They don't grow it, they don't clean it, they don't cook it, they don't do anything except eat it. And so there's no connection there to anything, right? Our human beings are almost like livestock in a CAFO. I mean, seriously, think about it. They're just there to eat. They just sit there and eat. The cattle aren't out in the pasture selecting the plants that they're going to eat. That's the way we've become as human beings. And so to get people's minds in a different place, get them involved in actually growing the food, cleaning it, cooking it, and so forth.
I'd second that idea of not accepting the role of consumer 100%. Any way you need to get on board, whether it's strolling the farmer's market for the first time, chatting a farmer, finding out what's produced locally, somehow get inside the producer, what's going on between producers and consumers, wherever you are, and then try your hand at becoming a producer of something that you can trade or be a part of. Most people, when they do start to work toward local foods and relationship types of marketing and becoming interdependent on each other, don't go back to the impersonal sort of, reminds me of a whole bunch of vacuum cleaners, the consumer role. Don't accept that role in its entirety. Get out of it in some way or another, even however small and incremental that change might be.
Well, so my question is mostly for Chris. You mentioned the 1985 Farm Bill and how we need conservation compliance for nutrients. I wondered if you would want to speak to the Bloody Run decision, Bloody Run Creek in Northeast Iowa. That was, it was a proposed decision passed by the administrative board yesterday. So about that specifically, and then also the DNR's role in regulating big ag more generally.
So, if you didn't hear, the administrative law judge found for the plaintiffs in a petition asking DNR to not renew the water use permit up at Bloody Run Creek, the Supreme Beef cattle operation. And it's in Iowa code that DNR should consider things such as water quality when they decide to approve or deny these water use permits, water withdrawal permits. And so the judge sided for the plaintiffs, and so remanded the water use permit back to DNR. And so I would just tell so many people when I go to places, they're hopeless, right? They really are hopeless. They come up, not kidding you. People come up to me, they have tears in their eyes. They're hopeless. Not kidding you on that. And so it's not hopeless. It's not hopeless. We have to demand better. We have to be armed with data, with real data, when we approach these people in authority, people in the regulatory agencies. As far as DNR in general, DNR has been captured by the industry for a long time now. It's becoming more apparent now, but this really isn't that new. They've been captured by the industry for a long, long time. Their role as an institution now is to endorse these things rather than regulate them. And so that's their function. They put the endorsement on it and they're good. And so we see these local governing bodies, especially like county supervisors, really just falling back on the idea, oh, that's not our responsibility, DNR will take care of it. Well, that's not the case. And so, I encourage you to attend county supervisor meetings, city council meetings, and so forth to try to express your opinions on these topics.
We have one more important thing to do, which are action steps. Been talking a lot tonight about, the issues at hand, but there are things we can do. And so Diane Delozier Lahr with 100 Grannies, she's going to come up and just kind of take a couple minutes and give us an overview of what we can do. And then we've got a handout for you that we're going to be giving you when you leave, that gives you some of these action steps to take.
Thanks. Thank you. This has been a great presentation and panel this evening. And a lot of the ideas you have already heard, but Ira, we kind of put together just a little list of things that you can get your head around and make some forward progress with. Sometimes we have to do things that aren't comfortable. And the more uncomfortable we are, seems like there's better results. We feel we get better at it. Okay, advocate for better water quality. Of course, urge your legislators to support the Clean Water for Iowa Act. It is HF 2354. These are very important to know about. The bill helps to protect waterways by requiring medium and large factory farms to have EPA Clean Water Act permits to monitor for waste released into waterways and to reduce pollution discharges. And read about that bill. Next, number 2 would be test your water for nitrates. Iowa Citizens for Community Improvement partners with the Isaac Walton League of America on their nitrate watch program. And easy to get the little testers. Get a free test kit, develop a plan, test, and then report your results. Again, the link will be here. Tell your legislators you support a factory farm moratorium until there are less polluted waters in Iowa. We must get this problem under control. Next one is demand agrochemical company accountability. You urge your legislators to defeat SF 2412, a bill that would shield pesticide and herbicide companies from lawsuits related to health damages if chemicals are EPA approved and contain a warning label. There is a big billboard close to Des Moines by Bayer Monsanto. Bayer is leading a coalition of 92 farming and chemical organizations to pass immunity laws in 5 Midwest states. I think it's up to 7 or 8 now, including Iowa. Its goal is to protect glyphosate usage, labeled probably carcinogenic by the World Health Organization. Learn about that bill. Number 5 is support local food producers, which we've heard a lot today. Unless it's clearly labeled, assume dairy and eggs sold in supermarkets come from CAFOs. Again, buy your meat, dairy, and eggs from other responsible sources. When eating at restaurants, I think this is really important too. Ask where they source their meat, dairy, and eggs, and choose foods not produced in CAFOs. It's amazing if you ask that question, well, I think we get it locally. Well, what do you mean locally? Well, so keep asking those questions. Next, attend lobby days at the Iowa State Capitol in 2025. Again, you have to do some uncomfortable things. And I know that I have been down there a couple times about the moratorium, and one of the reps, my rep, came out and I said, well, do you support the moratorium? And she's like, well, I have a CAFO. And so that started a really good conversation, but I was so glad to be able to give her my thoughts, and then she would come back with something else. But anyway, it's very rewarding. Lobby days at the State Capitol, Iowa Farmers Union. Lobby day is January 23rd. Iowa Alliance for Responsible Agriculture, Factory Farm Lobby Day is February 4th. Clean Water Day of Action, February 10th. And Iowa Citizens for Community Improvement Lobby Day is February 20th. So those are some of the things that we are advocating for now. And if anybody the panel has some additions. Anybody have any extra? Did you have a question?
Hey, I think really need to address some hallowed myths we have to really turn this around. One of the biggest ones is we're talking about food, but it comes down to we're talking about meat. We don't need to eat meat to survive. And it sets up a whole animal-human divide that affects our souls, it affects the health of the country, the planet. I mean, I grew up in Iowa, northeast Iowa, it's normal and diet. I got really scared, taken to a packing plant when I was in the 7th grade. Luckily, I ran out the side door. I was a fast runner, and the coach didn't grab me by the neck and drag me back in there. But we're turning Iowa into a cesspool. And why? The other myth is we have some kind of democracy. And this recent election should show us, once again, we don't have a democracy, because that only works if everybody takes part. And only about 1/4 the people end up electing a president. The same thing goes in Iowa. These people that are supposedly our representatives, they don't represent us. They represent money, big money. And that's why all this stuff's happening. And
I'm sorry, we're going to have to leave very soon. I appreciate
Sure.
your comments very much, and I know a number of people feel the same. But thank you very much. So anyway, we know we need to make changes in a lot of different ways, in the ways that we feel, are right. And really it's going to take people like all of us to really mobilize and to, use our collective power to make Iowa healthier and safer. So unfortunately, I wish we had another hour. We could probably ask a lot more questions and talk a whole lot more. And, but we're going to have to wrap up because the library is going to kick us out. So again, I want to thank Dr. Chris Jones, Audrey Tran Lam, Mary Jo Forbord, who's still with us, and Michelle Kenyon, who had to leave. I want to thank all of you for coming and sharing this very informative evening with us tonight. I feel like it's been very helpful, very useful, and I hope you all have found it important and compelling. And I really do encourage you to take these action sheet home and do whatever you can, as much as you can, whatever you can, because anything and everything that any of us can do is just going to push us in the direction that we want to go in. And thank you all for being with us tonight. And thank you for everybody on Zoom that's here tonight. Thank you.